Hi, everyone. Welcome to Black History Quest, Oregon Black Pioneers History Research and Conversation Program, sponsored by the Collins Foundation. My name is Mariah Rocker, and I am your host for this evening. Thank you so much for spending time out of your day with us. Now, we are coming to you live on the Oregon Black Pioneers Facebook and YouTube pages. If you can't stick around for the whole show, don't worry. You'll be able to find this and every episode of Black History Quest on the Oregon Black Pioneers YouTube page. But what is Oregon Black Pioneers? Well, we're Oregon's only statewide nonprofit dedicated to preserving and promoting the experiences of people of African descent. And we've been doing this work since 1993, illuminating this seldom told history through a variety of ways, including books, exhibits, lesson plans that you can download for free on our website, and programs like this one. Now, this is our 15th episode of Black History Quest. BHQ is an Oregon Black Pioneers original program with the goal of uncovering more of Oregon's Black history. With the support of the Collins Foundation, OBP hires history investigators to dive deep into a single source and share their findings here on our virtual show. Our goal is to deepen our understanding of Oregon's Black history, one episode at a time. Join us live every other month to learn about new research and take a peek behind the curtain at what the process of doing this research is actually like. Each episode is archived on our YouTube channel, so hi in advance to those fellow Oregon Black Pioneers that are watching in the future. But for those who are watching live, don't forget to share your questions in the chat section of the live stream so we can discuss them on air after the presentation. But with all of that out of the way, let's get started. Tonight, we are so lucky to have Zachary Stocks return as our history investigator. Now, if you don't know him, Zachary is a public historian, an interpreter, and the executive director of Oregon Black Pioneers. He previously served as program director of Historical Seaport and Visitor Services Manager of the Northwest African American Museum. Zachary is also a former intern of the Colonial Williamsburg and the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History, and a former seasonal park ranger at the Lewis and Clark National Historical Park. Zachary holds a BA in history from the College of William and Mary with a certificate in public history from the National Institute for American History and Democracy and an MA in museology from the University of Washington. He is a 2025 graduate of the prestigious History Leadership Institute, and he lives here in Astoria. Well, not here, I'm in Portland, but he lives in Astoria. I'd like to give a very warm welcome back to Black History Quest's original host, Zachary Stocks.
Hi, Mariah.
Hi, Zachary.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Glad to have you back. We are so thankful to have you join us as a history investigator yet again. And it's always good to work alongside you.
It's so good to be on this side of the camera again. I've kind of forgotten how it feels.
Yeah, as the person who really created this program and kickstarted it for us all, we are certainly glad to have you back as a integral part of it. So, welcome. Now, Zachary, as you know, since, like I mentioned, this was your idea, all Black History Quest's investigations begin with a source that sparked an interest. So can you get us started by telling us what the source is that you're looking into for tonight and what it was that caught your attention?
Yeah, so followers of Oregon Black Pioneers will be familiar with our social media series Snapshots, where we do short videos of our travels, you and me, as we go across the state.
Right.
And I did one pretty recently about a man named Booker T. Pannell, who was the mayor of Shaniko, Oregon, which is sort of like a semi-ghost town today.
Yeah.
And was only the second Black person ever elected mayor of an Oregon town. And
Wow.
it just so happened that our source for this history investigation was a letter that showed up at our office that had his name as the recipient. That really caught our attention.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's right. I love how it ties to all the different ways that we're telling these stories, and that it connect. That it was such an intriguing source to begin with. I'm curious, what sorts of questions did you have about this source, and what did you think it might represent?
Well, I'll get into it a little bit in detail in a moment, but the
Sure.
letter itself was addressed to a home in Portland. We
Okay.
certainly think first and foremost of Booker T's story as one based in Shaniko, because of course he became the mayor there. So to see that Portland address that we could associate with his name felt like new information. not just for us, but for anyone who's interested in Oregon's Black history. So my first question was really to learn more about, what was Booker T's experience like in Portland. But what I found was that the story was actually much bigger than that, and actually didn't involve Booker T. Panell all that much.
Okay, well, that is definitely how history goes, so that makes sense. I'm very intrigued to learn a little bit more about where the story went instead of where you were anticipating. And so now that we're all, I'm sure, excited to find out, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you to present.
All right. Well, thank you again for having me back on Black History Quest. I'm so excited to be a history investigator and to get to communicate with Oregon Black Pioneers audience, this time as a presenter. Pretty fun experience for me. And the presentation tonight is a really different one from a lot of other Black History Quest investigations, because the sources are not the same kinds of sources that other talks have been about. And I would say that the findings are pretty different too. So I hope you like this. Let's find out. My presentation is called Letters to Johnny May, a Black History Quest presentation. So here is an introduction to tonight's story. In May of 2025, a pink stationery box showed up at the Oregon Black Pioneers office. Inside were letters to a woman named Johnny May Brown, written between 1963 and 1964. This presentation is about the stories those letters revealed and what it tells us about life for Black Portlanders in the 1960s. Here's a quick breakdown of how the actual structure of this presentation will go. It begins with this mysterious package that we received. Then I'll get into the primary research question of this history investigation. I'll talk a little bit about the ethics of doing a project like this, because it's not really typical from the ways that we usually work. Then I'll introduce you to the specific people who are named in some of these letters, and then the stories that were communicated based on what was inside those letters. And then I'll come to some closing thoughts about what I think we learned and what it can tell us about Black history in Oregon. Okay, part one, a mysterious package. And this letter that you see on here is the one that first caught my eye when this package arrived. So this past May, a package arrived at Oregon Black Pioneers Portland office. It was a standard USPS box. There was a return address, but no name on the sender line. The package contained a vintage pink stationery box with about 25 unused holiday and birthday cards and a stack of personal letters. There was also a small note from the sender, which read as follows, quote, "Found these letters in the attic of a house that was being remodeled a short distance from MLK. Thought they might be important to someone and couldn't bring myself to throw them away. Someone's history. I don't know what else to do with them," end quote. This was the only information that we had. Now, I do want to say that situations like this are kind of a nightmare for museums and historical societies. Some people might think of this as a really nice gift, but to be honest, unexpected, unsolicited donations are not really the gifts that people might think that they are. We now have to make the determination, the uncomfortable decision, about whether we will accession these materials into our permanent collection and keep care of them in perpetuity, or throw them away. And that all really depends on whether or not the items inside are within the scope of the organization's collections, and whether there's significant provenance to know that the organization can legally keep these materials. So in this case, the connection to the scope was pretty clear. I don't know how the anonymous sender knew that the letters inside this box were sent by and received by Black Americans, but it turns out that they were. The envelope on screen, the one you see here, did confirm this for me because it mentioned the name of Booker T. Panell, someone who is already known to Oregon Black Pioneers for his historical significance. The provenance, though, was not as concrete, but we had a general understanding of where the letters came from, the people involved, and the era in which they were written. Under ideal circumstances, We would locate relatives or someone associated with those named in the letters for their permission to keep the materials. But I wasn't able to do that at this time, despite my best efforts. If we knew the address of the home which the letters were found in, we could speak with the homeowner, but that was also unsuccessful. The note from the donor said the letters were found in the attic of a home near Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard in Portland, but looking at a map, that was clearly not the address from where the package was sent. So, with a box of letters in front of us, a number of questions came to mind. First, again, I'm wondering, how did the donor even know that this was a Black household? I wondered, what household was this? And did we know anything already about the people that lived there? Who sent the letters? And to whom? And when? Ultimately, these and many other questions coalesced into one somewhat philosophical question, which is, when is a box of letters history? In this work, we often think of a few specific resources as our sources for learning about history, things like census records, vital statistics, newspaper articles, etc. But letters fall into the camp of what we call material culture. Material culture is the physical stuff that we create or keep that communicates our personal and social beliefs, values, and experiences. And material culture can tell us a lot about the individual lives of those who once possessed these items. Letters, in fact, are about as valuable as any material culture can be, as they tell us exactly what someone was thinking and doing at a particular moment in time. Even photos can't do that. So, with this in mind, Oregon Black pioneers realized that these letters were a valuable addition to our collections. Even before we knew anything about them, we knew that the information contained in these letters could be a glimpse into the lived realities of ordinary Black Portlanders of the mid 20th century. Because these stories are seldom told, the letters represent a rare perspective that should be preserved for our collective understanding of the community's past. The last bit of pre-investigation consideration that I had was around the ethics of doing this work. As I already mentioned, I was unable to contact any relatives of those named in these letters. Is it ethical to share their stories here publicly and to save their letters forever in our collection? Some of the details contained could be challenging. For example, the image shown on screen here, which I've deliberately made pretty difficult to read, is an arrest warrant. I spoke with some of my colleagues in the museum field about this. Many offered their opinions that our words are not really our own anymore as soon as we write them down. In the future, everything we've ever created might be found, researched, and saved by later generations. And that is just part of how history is communicated. If we did not read and record historical diaries, for example, we would never know how anyone felt about anything other than what they published. The entire field of material culture could not exist if we didn't keep the stuff of previous generations. So I was encouraged to continue by this advice, but I still wanted to move forward with care. It's totally possible that a descendant of someone from these letters will watch this presentation one day, or maybe is watching right now, and I don't want to create harm or hurt feelings. And I remain ambivalent about airing the personal stories of private figures with too much detail. So, for this presentation, I will summarize things from these letters, but I will keep direct quotations to a minimum. I've also chosen not to give too close a view on any of the letters or materials inside the stationery box. And to protect the identity of our anonymous donor who sent this box to us, I won't reveal the address from which those letters were sent. So let's talk about the process a bit. To begin to learn more about what these letters were and the stories they contained, I had to first sort through them. This was difficult. This was a tedious process. The first task was simply to count everything and see what was in the box. There were in total 12 letters, one bill, one official notice, which was that arrest warrant, one leaflet, and one envelope with no letter inside. And On screen, you're seeing just a sample of some of those materials. The recipient of all but 3 items was a woman named Johnny Mae Brown. From the available dates, all of the items were sent between June 1962 and February 1964, meaning these represent a look at a year and a half in one woman's life. All but one piece of mail in the stationery box had the same recipient address, 4702 Northeast 27th Avenue. With that information, we know that Johnny Mae Brown and the other members of her household lived here in the early to mid 1960s. And this is a view of that house as it appears today. Nice looking house. If you look at a map, this is where that house appears within Northeast Portland. Once I had sorted all the letters, I built a matrix to keep track of each letter's details. Using the postmark on the envelopes, I was able to assign a date to almost every letter. The envelopes also revealed the sender information. I next began the long process of reading each letter and, importantly, transcribing each letter into a separate document. Transcription is always tricky, as reading historical handwriting can be difficult. People's dialects also create challenges to understanding the meaning of a sentence. In this case, Johnny Mae's family members in Houston, Texas, used some regional or personal phrasing which were at times difficult to parse. Without the modern convenience of spell check, misspelled words also complicated the transcription process. In the end, I was able, though, to read and interpret each letter. I think. Now I'd like to share a profile of the people living in the home on Northeast 27th Street at the time that these letters were received there. I'm actually going to start with the first name that caught my eye, the thing that sparked my interest in doing this research project in the first place, and that is Booker T. Pannell, someone already familiar to Oregon Black pioneers. Booker T. Pannell was a native of Houma, Louisiana. He was born in 1929 and left Louisiana in 1945 as a 17-year-old to work in the shipyards of Bremerton, Washington during World War II. By 1948, he was living in Sacramento. He got married and had 3 daughters there. He was back in Kitsap County, Washington by 1952 and Klamath County, Oregon by 1955. Booker T worked there for Southern Pacific Railroad. He started out as a gandy dancer, someone who was laying track. 12 years later, though, Booker T was the assistant section foreman, where he oversaw rail operations within a 100-mile radius of Klamath Falls. So it was an important job. It isn't exactly clear when Booker moved to Portland, but newspaper hits show him living in Klamath Falls as late as 1959, where he was working as a mechanic and where he had racked up a few traffic citations. More than a few, actually. Booker later reported that he came to Portland in the early 1960s and ran an auto detail business. From what I found in this newspaper clipping on the right, that business was actually started in 1970 and was called Walnut Park Auto Service Center, which was located at 5212 Northeast Union Avenue, today Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard. By summer of 1962, Booker T was living with Johnny Mae Brown at 4702 Northeast 27th Avenue. Letters in the stationery box which mention him list these two on the front of the envelope as Mr. and Mrs. Booker T. Pannell, indicating that they were married. I could not find any record or other documentation to confirm details about this marriage, though. By 1970, Booker T was working as a Portland taxi driver and opened his own cab company, Rose City Cab Co. Newspaper articles suggest it was the first Black-owned cab company in the city, and he received a glowing profile in the Oregonian in 1971. The company lasted only a year in business, though, with Pannell citing competition and high insurance rates as the cause of the business's failure. In 1985, Booker took a drive into Eastern Oregon to see about the New Age community Rajneeshpuram that had sprung up near Antelope. He got lost on the way there and had to spend the night in the tiny community of Shaniko. But Pannell really liked the town, and he returned often. He eventually moved to Shaniko permanently in the 1990s and opened an antique store called This Old House. In 2002, Shaniko residents elected Booker T their mayor. This made him only the second Black person ever elected mayor of an Oregon town. He would serve in that role until shortly before his death in 2005. Booker T was certainly the most famous name found in the box of letters, but truthfully, his part in the story was very small. Almost every piece of mail in the box was addressed to Johnny May Brown, someone we knew almost nothing about, or nothing about at all, going into this project. Johnny May was born in Lincoln, Texas, near Houston, in 1920, making her 9 years older than Booker T. Brown was her maiden name, and she seems to have kept it throughout her life. Little is known about her early life. She came to Portland in 1944. At some point, she was living in Portland with a man named John H. Hamilton. It's unclear if they were married, but the couple had 2 children together, a daughter named Zora, born in 1947, and a son named John Jr. I could not find John Jr.'s birth year, but there was a John H. Hamilton buried at Willamette National Cemetery, born in 1941, who passed away in 2012. Maybe that's him. Even less is known about John Hamilton Sr., though. He was likely a soldier or had a wartime job in the shipyards. Perhaps he was also a Texan and moved to Portland with Johnny May. But regardless, he and Johnny May were no longer in a relationship by 1962 when she was living with Booker T and was identified as Mrs. Pannell. Even while living on the other side of the country, Johnny May retained a close relationship with her relatives back in Texas, her mother, Lily A. Brown, and her sisters, Bessie and Eleonora. Johnny May worked as a nurse for Multnomah County for many years. This appears to have been a family trait, as her sister Bessie was also a nurse, and her daughter Zora may have become one as well. Johnny May appears to have been a member of the Immaculate Heart Catholic Church in Northeast Portland. She was also a member and officer of the Rose Social Club, a philanthropic women's club during the 1970s. According to her obituary, Johnny May married a man named Roosevelt Lewis in 1964. I could not find the month of their marriage, but this means that her alleged marriage to Booker T ended sometime shortly after her last letter, which mentioned him in February 1964. None of Johnny May's letters to and from Texas mention Booker, but it is likely he never met her family, as they were only ever together while they lived in Portland. Roosevelt Lewis was a World War II veteran and ran a service station that still exists on Southeast Division Street. While doing some research, I came across a shocking story. On June 4th, 1972, Johnny May shot and killed her husband at their home on Northeast Mallory Street. She was arrested and held without bail, facing first-degree murder charges. But she was exonerated less than 2 weeks later after police determined that the killing was justified. Roosevelt Lewis had apparently threatened to kill his mother, who shared the home with him and Johnny May. Fearing that for the elderly woman's life, Johnny May fatally shot Roosevelt. His mother told police that Johnny May saved her life, and Johnny May was let go without further charges. Despite this frightening incident, Johnny May continued to live as Johnny May Lewis the rest of her life and is buried beside the man she killed at Willamette National Cemetery. She passed away in 2005, the same year as Booker T. Pannell. Johnny May's daughter Zora is an important part of this story as well. She was born in Portland in 1947 to Johnny May Brown and John Hamilton. I don't know where she lived as a child, but based on where her mother lived in the early 1960s, when Zora would have been a teenager, she probably attended Sabin Elementary and later Jefferson High School. I'll offer more details about Zora's teen years in a little bit. Like her mother, Zora may have gone on to become a nurse. She married a nurse, a man named Carl Machio Lewis, who worked at the Portland Veterans Hospital, today Oregon Health and Sciences University. They may have been coworkers there, but I couldn't find any details on this. They were married around 1980. Lewis had no relation to the husband of Zora's mother, Roosevelt Lewis, by the way. In 1980, or soon after, Zora and Carl relocated to his hometown of Jackson, Mississippi, where they would live the rest of their lives. They had no children together. She passed away in 1994 and was survived by her mother and her brother John Jr. in Portland. John Jr. is not very well represented at all in the letters found in the stationery box, so I won't go into any additional details about him in this presentation. So those are the figures found in the box of letters. Now I'll share with you the stories and events described in the life of Johnny May and her relatives during the 20 months between June 1962 and February 1964. During or before 1963, 16-year-old Zora Hamilton was sent to Hillcrest School in Salem. The Hillcrest School was Oregon's juvenile detention center for girls. It was in operation from 1908 until 2017. Girls at the Hillcrest School could be sentenced for offenses like vagrancy or immorality. Based on the language Zora used in her letters to her mother, it seems like she had been to this school more than once. The letter shown here is a visitation authorization for Zora, allowing her to be picked up and to spend a weekend with her family in March 1963. We don't know why Zora was sent there, but there are clues. In a letter from Zora to her mother in September 1963, she reveals that she has had behavioral issues in the past, and perhaps even mental health issues. She writes, quote, "I hope I leave here soon because I'm afraid I will start acting like I was at first, and that was just too much for words. And I'm beginning to get nervous again too," end quote. There are other hints that she may have engaged in petty crime. Another reason Zora Hamilton might have been at Hillcrest is because she had had a child as a teenager. In January 1964, she wrote, quote, "My counselor up here is working on seeing if I can take the baby home for home visit until I get a job, and then I can keep him home, because that's what I'm going to work for this time, because I do want that baby more than anything," end quote. Zora mentions her baby in multiple letters, but he is never named. It's unclear to me who had custody of the child or what became of him. It is possible he entered the foster care system. Meanwhile, Johnny May was checking in with her mother, Lily Brown, back in Houston. Lily wrote to see if the family planned to spend summer in Texas so that she can begin preparing. Lily missed her grandchildren and hoped to see everyone soon. Besides normal updates and gossip, Lily told her daughters that it had been hard to visit her mother, Johnny May's grandmother, because of the high cost of travel. It's unclear to me where her grandmother lived, but I get the sense that the Browns in Texas did not have a lot of money to live comfortably. Lily wrote to her daughter, quote, "Girl, it takes money to go down there and then some, and that I ain't got. Girl, money is something else." And then she gave a little smile, end quote. Oh, and I'll mention that the photo on screen here is a view in the 1960s of Houston's Fifth Ward, not far from where Johnny May's mother, Lily, lived. Lily Brown sent a letter to Johnny in July that suggests that the Portlanders did not come to Houston that summer. Sadly, the purpose of this letter was to tell Johnny May that her 8-month-old nephew had died. The baby was a child of her sister Bessie, who also lived in Houston with her mother Lily. He had had a fever in the night, and Bessie took him to the doctor. The doctor told her it was just a little colic and not to worry, but the baby passed away a few hours later. In her letter, Lily wrote, quote, "I told Bessie that doctor didn't know. I know that won't no colic," end quote. Then and now, Black women are routinely dismissed and ignored by healthcare practitioners, and there are serious racial disparities in infant mortality in the United States. It must have been extremely frustrating for the Browns to see how the doctor misdiagnosed the issue and failed to take action, as Bessie herself was a nurse. Johnny May, also a nurse, surely grieved this loss as well. Lily offered words of prayer, which showed her Christian faith. It seems to me that she belonged to a Protestant denomination, perhaps the Methodist church right beside her house, which stood on McGowan Street, where you see this picture was taken. That vacant lot is the address for Lily Brown. Johnny May, though, appears to have been a Catholic, at least later in her life. Johnny May occasionally received letters from Booker T's relatives, too. One woman in Houma, Louisiana, who signed only as G. Scott, seems to have been one of Booker's daughters. She refers to Johnny as mother, but I don't think that they are blood relatives. Without knowing G's name, I couldn't learn much more about her. But like Johnny May's relatives, G was also struggling with poverty. As a rural Southern Black woman, G was perhaps part of one of the most economically disadvantaged demographics in the United States at the time. In August 1963, G wrote to Johnny May. The letter reveals that she had not been doing very well, and she asked if Johnny had any dresses she could send her. In a heartbreaking couple of lines, G writes the following, quote, Johnny, I did not think that life could be so hard till I let out on the 2nd of February and have not been able to work. I feel so sorry for my small children and me, so pray for me. I feel like I am in the world alone. When you get down, no one treats you the same, end quote. We don't often think about Black Portlanders as being privileged, but it's useful perspective to see how, relative to other Black Americans at the time, a working Black woman in Oregon had money and opportunities which were not the norm for Black women in other parts of the country. On September 23rd, 1963, Zora wrote a letter to her mother from Hillcrest School. I want to note that this letter is dated, but the envelope had no stamp or postmark. What this suggests to me is that she planned to mail the letter, but instead simply hand-delivered the letter to her mother during a visit, likely around the same time. Most of the letter is cute requests for clothes and hair products and candy, but this is also the letter where Zora first expresses her desire to get custody of her child. She writes, quote, Mom, talk to Mrs. Smith about my baby and see what she can do about me getting him, because I think I have a better chance of getting him now. But I guess that's up to them, huh? End quote. Zora also says that she has thought it over and that she would like to go to Houston for a while and live with her Aunt Bessie and try to find work. It seems like this is something her mother had suggested, perhaps as a way of getting a fresh start and saving the money to be able to afford being a mother herself soon. After Zora confirmed that she wanted to go to Houston after her release from Hillcrest, Johnny May must have sent a letter to her family to let them know. In a September letter, her mother made a vague allusion to something along those lines, saying, quote, Johnny, I told Bessie what you said. She said she would write you, end quote. I believe that might be a reference to Zora's plans. The rest of that letter concerns wind and rain following Tropical Storm Cindy, which hit Galveston, Texas on September 17, 1963. Johnny's sister Bessie wrote too on September 25th, 1963. We learn from this letter that Bessie had a nickname for Zora. She called her Punky. Bessie writes, quote, Mother say you said Punky want to come and stay with me and me get her a job. Johnny May, I will be too glad for her to come and stay with me because it be lonesome staying by myself, end quote. It had only been a little more than 2 months since Bessie's baby had passed away, and she clearly was excited for the opportunity to have some company. She even invited John Jr. to come and stay with her too if he wanted to. Bessie's letter goes on to say that she will enroll Zora, aka Punky, into nursing school, and that she thinks Zora will make a good nurse. Bessie clearly loves Zora a lot and even playfully calls her my daughter in the letter. The photo you see on screen here is not a photo of Zora. It's a photo from Oregon Black Pioneers photo collection, but it's of a nurse, a Black nurse who lived in Texas. So perhaps this is a glimpse at something similar. On the same day that Zora wrote to her mother, Johnny May from Salem, she sent another letter home, but this one did not contain a message. Instead, it contained this leaflet advertising a Portland protest. I will read this for you now. Protest. 4 children were killed in a Birmingham church last Sunday. A dynamite bomb was thrown by white fanatics, encouraged by the obstructionist tactics of Alabama's Governor Wallace and the continual brutality practiced by Alabama police against Negroes, showed that the white population is determined to keep mob rule as the law of the South. We march for intervention. We demand that the city be occupied by federal troops to protect the lives of American citizens. Gather at 12:30 p.m. Sunday, September 22nd, Vancouver Ave Baptist Church, corner of Vancouver Ave and Fargo North. We will march downtown across the Broadway Bridge and rally at the federal courthouse, sponsored by Friends of SNCC and NAACP Youth Council. For further information, etc., etc. Y'all, I'm going to be real with you. When I opened this letter, and Belinda was there as my witness, I shouted some profanities because I was shocked to see this letter fall out, this leaflet. It was such a surprise to see this moment in history just in a box of letters like that. I'm not sure how Zora got a copy of this leaflet at Hillcrest School. Perhaps there was actually a chapter of the NAACP Youth Council in this girls' detention center. And if that's true, that would be a fascinating thing for future research. Nonetheless, Zora sent this letter to her mother, presumably in the hope that she might attend this march. The incident described in the leaflet is, of course, the infamous bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, by the Ku Klux Klan on September 16, 1963. The bombing killed 4 girls between the ages of 11 and 14 and seriously injured 22 others. The church was targeted because it was the site of a civil rights organizing for Black residents of Birmingham that spring, including boycotts and marches led by Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. In April 1963, King was arrested in the city and wrote from his cell the famous Letter from a Birmingham Jail. In the aftermath of the September 16th bombing, civil rights organizations across the U.S. called for action, including the sending of federal troops into Birmingham to maintain law and order. Pretty interesting counterpoint to today, right? As the leaflet described, the Portland chapter of the NAACP Youth Council and Friends of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, called on people to assemble at Vancouver Ave First Baptist Church. Like 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Vancouver Ave Baptist in Portland had already been a site of civil rights organizing for Black Americans. From Vancouver Ave, the assembled protesters marched across the Broadway Bridge to gather outside the federal courthouse in downtown Portland, a 3-mile walk. Vancouver Ave Baptist Church was also just 1 block away from the Catholic Church where Johnny May presumably attended services. Here are a couple of glimpses at how the incident was covered in the local newspaper. Apparently, over 600 people took part in the march. I wonder whether Johnny May and anyone from her home attended this march. A letter dated September 27th from a relative of Booker T's, either his mother or sister-in-law probably, indicate that they had been staying with Johnny May and Booker during the dates of this protest. I suspect that it was during the family's visit that they went to Salem to visit Zora and or pick her up. Perhaps they all went to this march together. The letters contained in the stationery box are noticeably silent on current events related to the civil rights movement. Perhaps some things were too painful or worrisome to talk about. It's a good reminder that people have no choice but continue their lives, even as world-changing events are happening all around them. The only line which I could think of could be read as a reference to civil rights is from Lily's mother to Johnny right after the Birmingham bombings. She writes, quote, "Johnny, these times is a mess. Everything is so high down here. Girl, it is a mess. Well, I do hope the times will change to good," end quote. The remaining 3 letters in the box with dates attached to them were all from around Christmas and New Year's. Johnny's mother, Lily, sent a letter between the 2 holidays sharing typical greetings and updates. She remarks on whose houses they had visited lately and how she loves cold weather. Lily says she's been wearing the sweater that Johnny May gave her. On January 14, 1964, Zora wrote to her mother to ask what was happening at home. She was optimistic that her time at Hillcrest would soon be coming to an end and hoped that her mother might help make arrangements to get her baby back. I don't know when Zora was finally released from Hillcrest or when she was able to, whether she was able to go to Houston to attend nursing school. I also could not tell what became of her quest to regain custody of her child. Later sources for Zora, including her obituary, never mentioned children again. Unfortunately, I also have to mention that girls at the Hillcrest School were sometimes experienced forced sterilization. This was more common before the 1940s, but may have continued afterwards. We do not know if Zora was forcibly sterilized at Hillcrest, but she never had any other children. In 1968, 4 years after the last letter in the stationery box, Zora was arrested for check theft after being found in possession of a U.S. Treasury check, which was from a stolen Portland mailbox. After she failed to appear in court, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. If she served the full term of her sentence, she would have been released in the summer of 1973 at age 25. This thankfully does not appear to have had a lasting impact on her later life. There are a few other odds and ends in the stationery box. The most recent letter was dated January 18, 1964, and was from an Air Force captain named Arthur Etheridge, who was stationed in Alaska. I tried looking him up to see what his relationship was between him and Johnny May, who he describes as a friend, but there wasn't a strong connection. Captain Etheridge lived many years longer in Alaska and had his own family. Perhaps he was a friend of John Hamilton, the husband or father of Johnny May's children. There was also an undated letter to Johnny May from her mother advising her to sign some enclosed paperwork before a notary public and return it to Texas. From what I could tell, Johnny and her sisters were named as the beneficiaries of her late grandmother's estate and were now trying to sell her grandmother's old house. We know Johnny May's grandmother was still living in March 1963, so she likely had passed sometime between then and February 1964. The other materials in the box are a letter from G. Scott again in Houma, Louisiana, dated June 1963, but only the envelope was present, no letter. There was a bill for Booker T from Sears and Roebuck, dated March 12th, but there was no year given. And a February 1964 warrant for Booker T's arrest for an unpaid $10 traffic violation. Concerningly, there was also this envelope you see here, an undated envelope for John Hamilton Jr., which was sent from the U.S. Treasury Department's Disbursement Division. I have to wonder if this is the check that his sister Zora was found in possession of in 1968. And if it was, then that would mean he must have pressed charges against his sister. As you can see, the address here is for 425 Northeast San Rafael. So Zora or Johnny May, to have had this letter, they would have had to either get it from John or take it from his mailbox. So that is a look at everything that was in the box of letters. There's no materials inside or dated after February 1964. Perhaps when Johnny and Booker T split up, she put this part of her life away. The address given for John Hamilton as 425 Northeast San Rafael is actually right off of MLK, which leads me to believe that this is the place where the box of letters was found. As Zora had moved to Mississippi in the 1980s and then passed away in 1994, John would have been Johnny May's only local survivor upon her death in 2002. Maybe that is when he obtained possession of these letters. Johnny May's obituary says that he now lived in Wilsonville, though. So how these letters got left behind in Portland is another mystery. So in terms of conclusions and what I learned, I would say that this is an interesting opportunity to look closely into the life of a single person whose experiences would otherwise be anonymous to us. Johnny May Brown's story is not in and of itself history making, but it is informative and could be a representative example of the experiences of working Black Portland women in the 1960s. Among that experience was a lot of hardship. Within a year and a half, she lost her baby nephew and presumably her grandmother. Her daughter was incarcerated and her marriage was not in a good place. Meanwhile, she endured the emotional weight of her daughter's estrangement from her own child and the poverty of her family and in-laws back in the South. All of this set against the backdrop of an increasingly deadly civil rights movement, which was transforming Black communities even in Portland. Within a few years, Johnny May's daughter would be sentenced to prison, and she was forced to shoot her new husband to death during an incident of domestic abuse. That's pretty heavy stuff. So what does this tell us about the life of Black Portlanders? Well, for one, I think it shows us that the Black Portland community maintained ties to other Black communities across the country. At a time when about half of all Black Portlanders were transplants from another part of the country, those transnational connections remained strong and were important parts of civil rights organizing. Johnny May's letters are also part of the anecdotal evidence of social trends, which were widespread then and now. Racial disparities in healthcare outcomes, the interactions with the justice system. These were surely not unique experiences felt just by the members of the Brown, Hamilton, Pannell family, but were consistent experiences shared by Black people across the United States of all backgrounds. And I would say that these letters are an important reminder that Black Americans are continuously pursuing our own destinies and holding on to our individual identities in spite of the circumstances around us, which we cannot change. Though it was not a big part of my presentation this evening, the letters in the stationery box all display a strong sense of humor, faith, and compassion. We as public historians rarely get to interact with these mundane details of life that occur in between consequential moments in history. But it's those ordinary things that actually make up the bulk of our lived experiences. So they're a part of history too. Obviously, I'm left with more questions than answers. These are surely not the only letters that Johnny May received during this time. And of course, I never had to have the chance to see any of Johnny May's own words. These are only the letters that she received. Those that she sent are presumably lost. But I would be hesitant to continue this research much more, as any deeper dive could be an invasion of privacy. Johnny May and her relatives were not public figures, and not every story is meant to live forever. So that is the end of my presentation, and I just want to close with some thank yous, specifically thanking the anonymous donor who sent these letters to us. It was certainly a surprise, and it could have caused a couple of headaches, but in the end, it did reveal information that we're happy to have and proud to share. And I would also like to thank the members of the Brown Pannell Lewis households, although I've never connected with any of you in person. If you're able to see this presentation, I want to tell you that your story matters, and I'm very much appreciative of the experiences of Johnny May in particular. I also want to thank the Portland City Archives, the supporters of Oregon Black Pioneers, for making this kind of research possible, and all of those viewing Black History Quest now and in the future. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Wow. That was such a wild deep dive into such a short period of time, too. I feel like that's kind of an unusual part of this particular investigation. But anyways, great job, Zachary. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this information and really taking care to both provide us a like detailed look into what you were able to uncover while also respecting the privacy of the folks that these stories are about. Um, Off the top of my head, the first question that I have is actually for if any of those family members do ever come across this episode. What's the bet? Like, would we give them back the letters if they're interested in it? How, what sort of relationship would we want to develop with folks like this and other folks who have found that their personal details have ended up into a like public history archive like
Yeah,
ours?
that's an interesting point. I mean, it's not just us, right? Museums around the country have physical materials that belonged to Black community members and other people of all backgrounds in their collections. And a lot of times people don't even realize it because it could have been passed along to other people. It could have left their own households. It can be difficult and challenging, right? Museums and other history organizations have the responsibility to care for anything in their collection in perpetuity, but these things can be deaccessioned. They can be given back. We've
Sure.
already scanned every single one of those letters, so we have a digital copy. I guess I would ask those family members, do you want these letters back? And if the answer was yes, we would of course give them. But I would
Sure.
ask if we could retain the digital letters and simply restrict the public access to them so that they continue to be learning resources for people in the future who want to understand more, not so much about their family in particular, but about the experiences of Black Portlanders of that time period.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was, I think, one of the really powerful things about the research that you just shared was how it felt like you were giving us just a glimpse into what may or may not, but like may have been a pretty typical experience for Black Portlanders at this time, while also set against the backdrop of everything else going on
Yeah.
nationally. And it just feels really poignant when when people live in unprecedented times, they're still living their own personal lives that I mean, it sounds like for a lot of it presented like it was in a bubble where you weren't really seeing much of what was going on until the younger generation, Zora, felt the need to kind of bring that into the conversation, which I think is feels like very representative of what was going on at that
Yes.
time,
Yes.
just all over the place. So yeah, I love the ability to be able to dive into this, and I think we also have a question in the chat that kind of goes alongside the other half. of this process. So I just asked you about what would happen if these materials, if the people related to these materials wanted it back. But we have a question in the chat actually about how should someone properly donate objects if they have something they think might be of interest. So
Hmm,
the other side of
sure.
the coin. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Oregon Black Pioneers is a collecting organization, right? So
Right.
we're interested in retaining materials that can help us tell the story of Black Oregonians. But we determine whether or not something is appropriate for us to save based on a lot of factors. What it is, what is its relevancy to our mission, what condition is it in? Is there clear
Mhm.
provenance? Are there conditions on the gift? Like maybe people want to give something to our organization, but only if it can be on display in an exhibit. I mean, we would probably
Sure.
decline something like that, to be honest, because we don't have exhibits that are on display all the time. And so
Right.
we would need to have individual conversations with each potential donor to
Sure.
discuss the specific things that they want to give or are
Sure.
considering giving.
Sure. So it's kind of a case by case basis, is what it sounds like, where folks can reach out to us and let us know what it is they're interested in donating, and then we can evaluate if it fits for our, yeah, for what the work that we're doing. Okay,
Right.
cool. That's good to know and a really good question. I know I had some questions that came up along the presentation, but oftentimes you would go ahead and answer them through the research that you're doing. But I will say that personally, getting to see the like I had not seen that protest pamphlet. I didn't realize that there had been a march there, even though I often talk about like, literally, stop at that location for some of
Yeah.
the work that we do. And so to find this little piece of the bigger puzzle, it just adds to the stories that you and I get to tell every day. So
Yeah. And I mean, think about that, right? So our walking tours, we
yeah,
visit Vancouver Ave Baptist Church. And to
yeah,
think that there was an assembly, over 600 people, according to
yeah.
newspapers, came to that protest march. So 600 people stood where we bring people today on tours.
Mm,
And then they proceeded to walk down toward the Moda Center to Broadway Bridge and walk over the river, right? And onto
yeah,
downtown. I mean, our tours aren't even 3 miles long, and people are sometimes huffing and puffing. So
for
to
real.
think you can get 600 people to do this, people were determined to speak out about justice and to make their presence heard after this tragedy that had happened. Tragedy is even the wrong word.
Mm,
After this violence that had happened
yeah.
in Birmingham. So it's just one of those great reminders that today, places we walk past all the time were scenes of such historic moments that we often forget about. And
Yeah.
sometimes we need these historical sources to remind us about the incredible things that have happened in our communities that there's still living monuments to, places that we can go to experience it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's no wonder that the Vancouver Avenue First Baptist Church is on the National Register of Historic
Yes,
Places,
sir.
with the connection to that sort of legacy. So that's yeah, I love getting to add to the stories that we're telling. I also wanted to ask if there were any findings. I mean, you mentioned that you were hoping to learn more about Booker T. Pennell and weren't really able to do so, but was there anything that didn't really meet your expectations or that you found to be like especially different when doing this research?
Well, I definitely thought that the story was going to mostly involve him.
Sure.
And I guess that's a patriarchal viewpoint. I'll go ahead and name that, right? Like it says Mr. and Mrs. Booker Pannell on the
Right.
envelope, and I assume that this must be his house. But all indications appear that that was not the case. Johnny
Hmm.
May was much older than him. I think that they, became a couple at some point, and I presume that they were married, even though I couldn't find documentation of it. But this is really Johnny May's story. I learned a lot more about Booker T actually in the process of doing this,
Right.
but I'm really grateful to learn about Johnny May for the first time and to see the kinds of experiences that she had. And it's really not an unfamiliar story about Black women coming from the South around the
Mhm.
time of World War II, right? Uh, Maybe attached to a man who had some sort of industrial labor occupation or military occupation, but also becoming a working woman herself,
Right.
in her case as a nurse, right? And then settling in Portland after the war's conclusion and becoming part of a thriving Black community. So these are the stories that living members of this community today have firsthand knowledge of, because this is their parents, this is their grandparents,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. A good reflection of the realities that this community has experienced. And a really important, as you kind of mentioned before, two parts. One, that everything we write down could potentially be a part of history. It is a very important part of getting that, extra beyond the headlines, but the things that are happening in that day-to-day life. And it feels like oftentimes throughout history we don't get that firsthand for women
Yeah.
specifically. So being able to point to this story for a Black woman here in Portland, even if she isn't necessarily someone famous, feels very important because her story probably reflects so many Black women like myself here in Portland,
Yeah.
um, throughout time. So
I only
I'm just,
regret
yeah,
I just regret the fact that we couldn't hear her own words herself,
yeah,
because these are just the letters that she received. So I do wonder how might things have been different had we been able to learn how she felt about her daughter's situation at the
mm,
Hillcrest School and being separated from her daughter, or her son rather, or
right,
how she might have felt about the circumstances going on in the world during the civil rights era. We
yeah.
missed that. Yeah.
That's a good point. We don't actually know. She may have like on her side of things, been mentioning stuff that isn't part of the story. So that's also a good thing to consider, that typically when we uncover letters, which we often do use, we have used for other investigations here in Black History Quest, but it is often like a one-sided piece of that puzzle as well. So hopefully somebody someday is connected to this family and can offer us a little bit of clarity, or a little bit of insight into Johnny May herself, because I know that I'm intrigued.
Yeah. Well, the quest continues.
Yeah, the quest continues. I suppose technically you mentioned it, but I do typically ask, if you had more time, where would your next research direction go from here? I know personally, I think I would be interested in learning more about that potential NAACP youth
Yeah.
connection to Hillcrest. Like that feels very intriguing, but I'm curious if that's what you would want to uncover, or a different path that you're interested in.
Yeah, I alluded to that. We're on the same page here, Mariah.
Okay.
I think that it wouldn't necessarily be appropriate to try to continue to dig into the personal letters of this family any further than we have. Because, like I said,
Sure.
we don't want to create harm, and these are hard stories.
Yeah.
Um, but I am very intrigued about the Hillcrest School since it has such longevity, 1908 to 2017. I'm curious about, what is the Black history of this girls' juvenile justice center?
Mm,
Were there disparities, racial disparities at the school, or disproportionate numbers of Black girls who were incarcerated there, and for what kinds
right.
of crimes? Was it typical for Black young women to be separated from their children like this, and
Mm,
what became of the children? I think that there's so many questions that I'm now thinking of, related to the experiences of the girls who spent time at Hillcrest School, that if I had the opportunity to continue, I would start there.
sure. Okay. Yeah. I agree. I feel like it's a very intriguing part of the story. And that also kind of lends to where what we can learn from things like this, from letters. Like it might not necessarily have something new to add, but it can point us in a direction where we eventually uncover additional information. So, um, yeah, that's pretty awesome. I suppose I should finish us off with the question that we always ask, which is, how has what you uncovered changed our understanding of history?
Yeah, I knew the question was coming, right?
Right.
Um, and I really thought about this. I don't think that this research project has changed our understanding of history, but it has
Sure.
it has affirmed our
Mm,
understanding of history, right? It is a way for us to realize the legitimacy of the Black Oregonian experience in the ways that it is
absolutely.
typically told only in anecdotal ways. So this is, in many ways, the kind of research that we've been talking about here are the kinds of stories that are passed around through oral history, right?
Right.
But here, seeing it written down, it makes it feel not more real, but it makes it feel more permanent, to be honest
Yeah,
with you.
totally.
And so to see that there is testimony from the moment that these things happened, which confirms the experiences that we hear in the testimonials of community
Mm,
elders when they talk about their experiences, it just makes it such a more solid story, one that can be reliably trusted by historians, and one that adds that important context about what life is like for Black Portlanders, past and present. So I'm really grateful to have had a chance to have this unique window into the past.
yeah, absolutely. And kind of fun to get into a more philosophical Black History Quest
Yeah,
investigation this
yeah.
time. So, okay, cool. Well, is there anything else you want to share with us before I let you out of here?
Just my gratitude for being able to do a little bit of research myself and to share it here on Black History Quest with you.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, you've been doing incredible work for this organization for years, but we're glad to get to highlight a little bit of it through Black History Quest tonight.
Well,
So yeah,
thanks,
thank you so much for your time, Zachary.
of course.
Awesome. It has been so wonderful getting a chance to work alongside Zachary, both outside of this Black History Quest and here tonight. And I am just so thankful for everyone that's joining us live and in the future to hear a little bit more about these stories. But with all that in mind, that'll do it for this episode of Black History Quest. As always, we want to thank the Collins Foundation for sponsoring this show. Make sure to learn more about them and the projects that they support at collinsfoundation.org. And of course, Oregon Black Pioneers depends on the support of ordinary people like you who believe in sharing the stories of Oregon's Black history. So if you enjoyed this show and want to help support this and others like it, please consider a donation to Oregon Black Pioneers. If you have any questions about this episode or would like to become a history investigator yourself, please send an email to hello@oregonblackpioneers.org. And of course, stay tuned for the next episode of Black History Quest in November, where, as always, we'll try to answer the question, how can one source change history? Thank you so much for joining us, and good night.